I love how there's just a bat version of everything. We know the Batmobile, we know the bat signal, the Batarang, but what about the bat kite? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 13th film in the DCEU, DC's 2023 sci-fi superhero film, The Flash. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Flash stars Ezra Miller, Michael Keaton, and Sasha Calle, and was directed by Muschietti. It tells the story of Barry Allen, the Flash, as he travels back in time to fix mistakes in his own life, only to find out that these small changes have wide-reaching unintended consequences. In spite of how many movies I see every year, it's rare for me to go into a film with no anticipation. Usually there's something in the marketing that's piqued my interest, or positive word of mouth from friends in the critic sphere, or simply just an interest in the story. The Flash is a film that didn't really fall into any of those categories. As a character, The Flash has never been all that interesting to me, and I haven't enjoyed any of this version of The Flash's previous outings, so there wasn't a big draw for me there. The assortment of off-camera controversies involving Ezra Miller didn't exactly help with my anticipation either, but as a critic, I'm certainly able to separate art from artist when actually viewing the film. However, those controversies contributed to some of the changes and many postponements of this film. And to be completely honest, I kind of forgot this movie was even coming out until like 2 weeks ago. So, like I said, no anticipation, but no begrudging negativity going in either. With all that being said, I was pleasantly surprised by this film. It wasn't a genre-shattering masterpiece or anything, but it was enjoyable. My previous experiences with The Flash have been somewhat limited. I obviously knew this DCEU version of the character, and I recall versions of The Flash in cartoons as a kid, but in terms of any sort of storyline specifically revolving around The Flash, my only point of reference was the DCEU film Justice League The Flashpoint Paradox, which just so happens to draw upon the same comic book story arc as this film. I knew it was going to be different, and it certainly is, but the basic idea is still the same. The Flash trying to change something about the past, but inadvertently changing everything. Even knowing that storyline premise ahead of time, I was pleased with how it was done in this film. It's got the expected time travel butterfly effect shenanigans, but it's sort of a cross between an origin story comedy and a multiverse drama, drawing upon past DCEU films and beyond. We've had a lot of multiverse films as of late, and while this doesn't contribute anything particularly new to that idea, it is fun seeing it mixed together with time travel. As with any film about time travel, you could spend all day picking apart the logic and continuity of the movie, but I gotta say, I like the idea behind the spaghetti theory of space-time. The third act climax runs a little long and a little underwhelming, and some of the film's takeaway messages and lessons are undercut within minutes of learning them, but the story does a decent job of balancing some emotional ideas with sci-fi entertainment. As I said before, I haven't been the biggest fan of the DCEU version of The Flash. The character's been kind of annoying and not particularly funny to me, so I was, again, surprised by how entertaining this was. Not every joke landed, but the situational humor was much improved, and there was an entertainingly meta acknowledgement of how abrasive this Flash's personality has been. So there's a good deal of humor here, but also a lot of very bizarre stuff too. In fact, befitting of the time travel theme, there's almost this anachronistic quality to the film. Apart from perhaps our recent obsession with multiverse stories, this doesn't feel like a 2023 movie. Instead, it feels like it would have fit right in with comic book movies in 2003. The humor, the weird balance of goofy, overly comic booky things and attempts at dramatic realism, even something as simple as the visual effects feel of that time period. I'm sure you could argue that that was what they were going for, but the frequently rubbery video game graphics quality of the CGI was definitely a little distracting at times. Luckily, the film had some other things in there to distract us from the distraction. I know that people tend to have some mixed feelings on the idea of fan service, and while you could probably say it delves into that territory here, I'll describe it simply as nostalgia. Now, there's a number of nostalgic elements and Easter eggs for DC fans here, but the biggest one is something that was prominently featured in all the trailers and all of the marketing. So even though it feels like it's something that should be spoilery, Warner Brothers was very upfront about spoiling it themselves. So, that biggest nostalgic element? Michael Keaton as Batman. Now, I get it. Sounds like blatant fan service. And trust me, they really lean into it. The suit, the Batmobile, the iconic Danny Elfman theme. But within the context of this multiverse story, it actually makes sense. So it's not just thrown in there for the sake of audience cheers. Though that was certainly still a result, at least at my screening. There's no denying that this film had a long and troubled production. There were issues with the film itself, with the filmmakers, with the lead actor, countless postponements, time-crunched VFX work, talk of further delays, talk of recasting, talk of canceling the film outright. Now, I know there are people who love The Flash and have waited decades for this character to get his own theatrically released film. And I know Warner Brothers had already dumped a ton of money into this movie, but for the last year or so, keeping this production limping along seemed like a weird decision. But I absolutely understand now why they so desperately wanted this movie to come out. Yes, fan satisfaction, yes, money, but the biggest reason? The upcoming franchise reboot and transition from the DCEU to the DCU. With this film, they essentially now have carte blanche and can do whatever they want with the DCU. Recast big-name characters, redo previously told storylines, focus on entirely different backstories and identities for various heroes, whatever they want. And if people complain and say, hey, you can't do that, that doesn't make any sense, all I have to do is point to this movie and say, yeah, it does. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the story. This is based on the Flashpoint story arc from the comics. They changed things up quite a bit, and I concede that none of the changes are particularly new or unique within the time travel, multiverse genre, but it ends up being a really interesting and entertaining story. I'm somebody who likes time travel movies, so that definitely helps here, but the blend of origin story, franchise multiverse, comedy, and drama just works here. It pulls elements from other films and name drops a certain time travel staple, but it comes together in a surprisingly entertaining way. The second pro is the nostalgia. I know this is what they were banking on, but it works. Pulling Michael Keaton as Batman into this story, complete with music, gadgets, and one-liners, could be construed as cheap fan service, but it actually makes sense in the context of a multiverse story like this. There are quite a few other Easter eggs and nostalgia-inducing things not shown in the trailers, so I won't spoil those for you here, but they too mostly work. Again, I know this sort of thing is often viewed as a trap for fans and a way of distracting from a film's issues or capitalizing on the success of past movies, but we get Michael Keaton's Batman, so I don't really care. On the con side, the biggest issue is the CGI. It's so weird, because it's not awful across the board. There's some visual effects shots that look good, and others that are kind of weird, but work in the context of a goofy comic book situation. But then there are other things that just look really bad. For instance, there are scenes where two versions of a single character are occupying the same space and interacting with one another. Sometimes this looks fine, but there are other scenes where the CG facial replacement on assumingly a body double is jarringly bad, to the point where you can kind of make out the digital seam between the CGI replaced face and the real head. That same kind of mixed bag visual effects scenario is everywhere though. There are some really cool shots during some of the speedy moments, but other things look like very early PS3 video game graphics. It's bizarre and kind of has this unfinished quality to it, so I think there was some major post-production time crunch here. Con number two is the third act. So I realize that's a little broad, but it encompasses a number of things. The action climax of the third act is a bit underwhelming. The Flash speediness adds some fun to it, but the big CGI battle against aliens and faceless drones thing was already overdone in 2013 when we got our first look at this particular scene. There's also a clumsy antagonist introduction around this time. We first get a glimpse of this character about 2 hours beforehand, but then the story completely forgets about them and doesn't acknowledge their existence until this weird rushed ending. And my final issue with the third act has to do with the film's message. The lesson it teaches is totally fine and valid. Barry learns something important, but then proceeds to unlearn it a minute later. Whether it was setting up for a joke or setting up for future films in the DCEU, I don't know. But it was a weird, counterintuitive thing to do for this particular story. Before I give you my rating recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying The Flash or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give The Flash 3.5 out of 5 paws. Apart from some frequently dodgy CGI and an underwhelming third act climax, this nostalgia-infused multiverse drama meets origin story comedy was a surprisingly entertaining ride through space and time. I would recommend The Flash to fans of multiverse stories or those that really enjoy DC superheroes. We've had a lot of multiverse films lately, including a lot in the comic book movie realm. And while this doesn't offer anything starkly different from those other films, it's still a fun spin on the concept. This is also a very nostalgia-influenced journey. Even if the current DCEU versions of various Justice League characters like Batman and Superman aren't your thing, this film offers a trip back to former beloved variations, plus a few versions that never were. If you liked The Flash, I would recommend Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox. Part of the DCEU, or DC Animated Universe, this is an animated film based on the same comic book story arc as the live-action movie, Flashpoint. The specifics of the story are quite different, but this gives some more alternate Justice League action, and of course some more of the Flash. If you like the time travel elements of the story, as well as the concerns about potentially altering the future, you should check out Back to the Future Part 2. Really, I'd recommend the whole Back to the Future trilogy, but Part 2 gets more into the idea of multiple timelines and alternate futures. And if you enjoyed Michael Keaton as Batman, you might want to watch, or rewatch, Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. It's a very interesting blend of goofy, supremely comic booky elements and very dark, Gotham-y aesthetics. Plus, it served as the introduction of the iconic Keaton-era elements that are nostalgically reused in this film. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Flash? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about time travel gone wrong? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.